A very good evening to all of you, and welcome to yet another edition of Wealthwise with Edelweiss. Today, we have with us Mr. Kalpen Parekh, the President of DSP Investment Managers Private Limited. Mr. Parekh is an industry veteran and a well-known name in the field of finance and asset management. And if I may also add, particularly very famous amongst the Twitterati clan. He's passionate about behavioral finance and believes that investor behavior is one of the most crucial aspects to a good investment experience. As you are well aware, investing temperament and behavior are important in investing at both good and bad times. As investors, we often fall to narratives instead of relying on crude facts. But evidence always trumps stories, and history teaches us a great deal. Today, Mr. Kalpen Parekh will help us gain an understanding how we can deal with behavioral traps while investing, and moreover share what has been his learnings over the past 2 decades with asset allocation in his personal portfolio. Welcome, Mr. Parekh. Welcome on our platform. Guys, please note there will be a lag of about 10 to 15 seconds due to connectivity or network issue. Kindly bear with us. Over to you, Mr. Parekh.
Thanks, Tanya, and thanks to Edelweiss Wealth team for inviting DSP and me to talk to all investors across the country. We call this session a lighthouse session because it is an attempt to try and navigate the fluctuations and volatility which is happening on multiple fronts, whether it is the economic front, whether it is how markets are behaving, or whether it is how our minds behave. And volatility in the underlying asset classes, it is there in our minds as well. So we've been doing this session for quite some time now, almost the last 5-6 months. So I want to start with a disclaimer, and I say this to everyone who is looking for some prediction on how the future will look like. I want to start with a disclaimer from someone who's invested for the last 79 years, almost 8 decades. There is no investor who has been an investor for 8 decades on a very large scale of money. And one of the most successful investors, Warren Buffett, says that don't predict rain, instead build arcs, because you cannot predict what time of the day will it rain. What you can broadly predict is the months when it rains, and when it rains, how do you shield yourself from stormy weather. Likewise, with investing, we cannot predict what will happen to stock prices or sectors or currency or macroeconomic variables. We can broadly get a sense of the direction, and we can prepare that whenever things go wrong, can we shield our portfolios or defend them in such a way that it does not destroy our wealth to such an extent that we cannot be back in the game. The whole game of investing is to last for long. One reason why Warren Buffett is the richest man on earth, who started with a small amount of money at the age of 11, is not only because he compounded his portfolio at 17 or 18% CAGR over the last 60-70 years, but because he lasted for 60-70 years and he did not see very large actual capital loss on the portfolio permanently. There could have been short-term moments like the month of March where his portfolio would be down 40-50% like our portfolios, or the year of 2008-9 where temporary prices came down, but you navigate through that to not convert temporary price falls into permanent losses. And what are those rules and a timeless wisdom that we learn from successful investors who have lasted long? So a large part of what we talk at DSP, what we do at DSP, what we preach at DSP is about surviving and lasting longer than looking for returns which are very fast. So with that disclaimer, I want to start start the session. I want to give the backdrop that we are in very unusual times, primarily because first time ever we are witnessing very low interest rates in India and in rest of the world. World over, there is a very clear focus by all central bankers to bring interest rates closer to zero, or not even mind if they have to take rates below zero, which means you give money to the bank and you have to pay them money. You give 100 rupees and after 10 years you get 99 rupees back, which is negative interest rates. What I'm telling you is not easy to imagine right now for us in India, but in very large parts of capital around the world, whether it is in Japan, whether it is in Europe, interest rates have actually gone below zero for 30, 50, 70-year bonds. And in US, interest rates are now just around 0.7%. And time and again, the Federal Reserve has made its stance clear that we will do whatever it takes to support markets or asset prices or the economy. Now, whether that's fundamentally right or wrong from a long-term perspective, we don't know that. Time will tell. But that is a reality. Rates are at zero. One very wise investor in US made this comment in the month of April when the Fed was reacting to the first round of corona impact, to the first round of sharp correction in market prices everywhere in the world, by making a statement that will keep interest rates low, and they announced their $1 trillion plus sort of stimulus. And Scott Minerd made the statement that the Fed has made it clear it will not tolerate prudent and responsible investing. This is a very powerful, insightful comment that I am sharing with you. All through, most investors who have done disciplined investing in their life in the last many decades have done it around very prudent principles of good businesses at good prices and good holding periods. But no longer are good businesses today available at good prices. They are all available at extra expensive prices, purely because the cost of money has gone to zero. What does zero interest rate mean? It means there is no gravity on earth. So imagine, we all know that the gravitational force is measured as 9.81 in unit terms, and which is why we are able to stay anchored on the ground. But if gravity starts reducing from 9.8 to 6 and 3 and 0, we will start floating. That is exactly what's happening in the marketplace today, where asset prices are floating upwards and sometimes beyond what they would have in their past history. And also in the last 10 to 20 years, what has happened is in many large parts of the world, bonds have earned higher return than equities, which is very unusual, because normally if a bond earns 7% return, the share should earn 10 to 12% return, because equity should always have some risk premium over a stable return earning bond instrument. But because of huge collapse in interest rates world over and a huge slowdown in economic growth world over, barring few pockets, everywhere equity prices have been subdued and bond prices have actually run up over the last 2 decades. So this again is not very similar to what we have learned in textbooks. Corporate finance books have taught us that over a long period of time, stocks should earn more return than bonds. But temporarily in the last 2 decades, that thesis has got challenged. Lot of debt has exploded. So if I were to tell you that invest in this company which is bringing 1 rupee of equity as capital, but the company is also borrowing 4 rupees of capital via debt, and having a 4:1 debt to equity ratio to run its whole business model. The capital structure is levered 4 times is to 1. The world today is almost levered 4 times is to 1, where they have 1 rupee of equity, but roughly 3.5 to 4 rupees of debt on the balance sheet. So if you have to invest in a single company with 4:1 debt equity ratio, you will be cautious. You really won't be very confident of such a company surviving down cycles. But world markets today are operating at almost 4:1 debt to equity ratio. On the other hand, overall debt has gone up, but the cost of that debt has come down. Normally, when a company comes and borrows more money every month, every quarter, every year, we as investors would not like to give money at lower interest rates. We would demand a higher amount of compensation, that if you are raising capital constantly, you need to pay a price for it. But in today's world, countries are raising more and more of debt, but at lower and lower rates, because they are being supported by their merchant bankers, their central bank, which is keeping rates low. Now, on one hand, stock prices, paper prices have run up, but actual core commodity prices are all at 10-year or 15-year or 20-year lows, whether it is metal prices, whether it is soft commodities, or even commodities like natural resources and oil, they are at 10 and 20-year low. So whatever the economic engines need for their day-to-day operations, those commodity prices are at a decadal low. But so profitability also is at a decadal low. Profit growth rates are at a decadal low. Return on equity is at decadal low, whether in India or rest of the world. But stock prices are at significant high. So this again is a very unusual environment. We should be aware of that. And the world continues to stimulate significantly. The bubble gets bigger. And it's fine, we should learn from these bubbles, we should benefit from them rather than have a moral judgment whether it's right or wrong. In India also, we are talking today when Reserve Bank announced that we will keep interest rates stable, and they've infused more liquidity through more open market operations by indicating that we will purchase a lot of government bonds from the bond market. So the government needs a lot of capital to achieve their $20 billion stimulus to the economy. But who is going to give that capital? We are not a rich country with free money. We are a poor country and a developing country. Where is that capital going to come from? So the government will need to constantly borrow that money. But who will keep interest rates low if they want to borrow such a large amount of money? That's where the Reserve Bank steps in and says that don't worry, we will ensure that there is ample liquidity generated and given to money markets and bond markets and banks and institutions, so they can come and buy government bonds at lower interest rates. So that's the setup in which we are operating right now. And what is this setup really creating? Actually, in the last 6 months, a lot of experts and economists and media players and fund managers have been speculating about what type of recovery will this be, what will be the shape of the recovery. To me, honestly, all this is futile. These alphabets don't matter. So someone says V shape, someone says K shape, someone says L, and stuff like that. If you ask me, I would say it's I don't know, I, D, and K, because no one knows how things really play out. We all know things in hindsight. And actually, it's a V-shaped recovery in a very different context. The red line is indicating that profits have gone down, economic growth has gone down, but the green line indicates that the stock prices have gone up. So that's the irony of this cycle right now, that market is pricing in far better days ahead than what human beings are pricing in. We are all still nervous. We are all operating from home. We still feel the world is not safe to go out and do our jobs as we were doing in the past. While lockdowns are gradually getting lifted, some economies have started doing well. Some of them are reaching their previous levels in terms of production, sales growth, etc. But a lot of them are still operating with limited outcome, limited output, and a decline in profitability. But the stock markets are back to all-time highs. The leaders are changing. Last time, 10 months back, banks were at all-time high, NBFCs were all-time high. Today, technology stocks are at all-time high, pharma companies are at all-time high. So the leadership is changing. The market is back to its old level, but the constituents are really changing. So a lot of moving parts, and that moving parts and this irony of collapse in profitability, but expansion of market cap will continue to create a lot of volatility as we move ahead. There will be phases when market will start asking questions that where is the earnings growth, where is the profitability, how long can we continue to keep paying a higher price. So be aware, be prepared for extremely higher amount of volatility, both on the upside as well as downside. Volatility is not bad. It means prices will swing. A disciplined investor who has good rules of navigating can actually benefit from this volatility. What are the rules to navigate or learn how to benefit from volatility? That is what I will explain in the next few slides. Two very big influences on Warren Buffett again, who have taught him the principles of one, buying good companies, and two, not overpaying for them. So his partner, which is Charlie Munger, he always says that before you invest, always ask question that can this company survive, or can this investment have any large risk? Is the risk large enough that it can kill me completely? If the answer is yes, don't make that investment in the first place. This is the difference between wise investors and normal investors. The world is made up of 99% normal investors, and only 1% investors are truly wise, who are able to navigate and survive for really long periods of time and make their capital compound at very high rates of growth over time. So he starts by saying that risk management is done before investing, not after investing. Most of us invest money, lose money, and then talk about risk. We put money and ask the question, "Kitna paisa banega?" We rarely ask the question, "Can this investment go wrong? What can go wrong if I'm buying this share or if I'm buying this mutual fund?" So that is a shift I advise all investors to always keep in mind. That first ask the question, where am I going to die? So I never go there. And if you never go there, you will never die. So if you want to achieve immortality in your investments, in a way, I'm slightly exaggerating, but it tries to say that look for margin of safety. Look for, where can accidents happen? And if you know that, okay, this sector is more prone to accidents, give up, don't go there, even if near-term returns are good. Because in the long term, someday the accident will happen and you will, lose capital. Where can accidents happen today? Today, accidents can happen in either weak businesses which have lot of leverage and they cannot navigate slowdown, or accidents can also happen in very good businesses, but the market is pricing them wrong. So the second learning of risk management is how much should we pay, what price should we pay. Here, Ben Graham has taught the world this concept of margin of safety, and he explains this very beautifully by saying we should buy stocks or funds or asset classes the way women buy groceries, not the way they buy perfume. What is he trying to say? Don't overpay for anything. Even if it is a great company, don't go and pay a crazy price. Apple is a great company. In the last 1 year, $1 trillion market cap has doubled to $2 trillion. But in the last few years, the profit growth of Apple is 5%. It's growing profitability at only 5%. But the stock price has gone up by 30-40% over the last few years. So there is again a disconnect because more and more money is chasing stocks. Stocks are running up. Now, is Apple going to meet with an accident? No. But the stock price of Apple can meet with an accident where for a few years it can consolidate. Now, does it mean we don't own the stock? I'm not saying that. I'm only saying don't go overboard after a story has become very successful. Have it as a small part of the portfolio or acquired gradually through SIPs or staggered investment, so that whenever there is volatility in the stock price, we can acquire more rather than putting all the money one time. Great companies like today Infosys and TCS are back to market highs, but a company like Infosys between the year 2000 to the year 2009 gave zero return. Profits went up by 40% year on year, but the stock price actually remained flat because it had run up a lot. So just be conscious of not overpaying in your investments, whether through funds or through direct investments. The second rule of sensible investing or not making mistakes is not to get carried away in too much of noise, in too much of news, in too many views that are imparted that are given to us through either external sources, people like me, so-called experts who everyone has a view. Everyone wants to sell a certain product to you. I may want to sell my fund. Someone else will want to sell their funds. So everyone has a vested, interest. Be aware of that. You have to play to your vested interest, not to our vested interest. So take every information with a pinch of salt. Take every information with some amount of cynicism and skepticism. Don't get carried away. Don't get carried away if I come and tell you that Reserve Bank has brought rates down. India's growth will come back. Come and blindly put money. These things don't work. Look back at data, look back at evidence. Today, sitting at home, all of us get hundreds of messages on WhatsApp. Our friends and family members have all become experts. They know how to cure corona without knowing what it takes. They know how to manage money without themselves having ever managed their money successfully. So be conscious of only right information, not more information. I want to illustrate that with an example. If any of you land at Mumbai airport and you want to go to BKC, where Edelweiss office is, Kalina and BKC, how would you travel? You're given two maps. One is a Uber map, a very simple map which broadly gives you the 3 routes and the time it takes. The second is a map given by the BMC, a very detailed map, every lane, every road, very clearly written. Less information, more information. Which map will work for you? The map with less but right information will take you there. The map with more information will confuse you, will actually delay your journey. So, just be conscious of your sources of information. Today, if you watch television channels, if you watch Republic, you will feel that India is a great country. If you watch India today, you'll feel, India's government is a bad government, India is going to the dogs. So everyone again has vested interest, and you have to be very, very rational to retain your independence of thought and independent thinking. And in investment management, successful investors are independent, rational, cold-blooded thinkers. They are not emotional. They don't get carried away with what everyone is talking. So having your own opinion becomes very important. How do you form that opinion is what this concept of base rates will explain to you. I just want a quick signal that I'm audible and everything is fine. If one of you can just confirm that to me, please.
You're audible.
Okay, fine. So the next principle of how to take sensible, rational decisions is a concept called base rates. We should always respect base rates rather than anecdotes and narratives in our decision making. I'll give you an example of that. This is a survey which was done many years back in Germany, where all the German citizens were asked this question. That and Mark is a very common name for Germans. So they asked this question that Mark likes to listen to Mozart. We want to know, if you have to make a guess, who is Mark most likely to be? What is his profession most likely to be? Is it likely to be a literature professor, or is Mark likely to be a truck driver? When this survey was done, 85% of respondents said that obviously Mark will be a literature professor because he's listening to Mozart. And Mozart is a classical musician, and only sophisticated people or people in such professions would like to listen to him. Now, partly could be true, but largely it's a stereotype that only such people listen to Mark. Now, someone who knows maths, someone who knows a little bit of numbers and statistics, will think a bit differently and say that, let me ask this question: how many, what is the ratio in Germany of people who are truck drivers and people who are literature professors? That ratio is some 1,000:1. So by default, the number of marks you're going to find as truck driver is going to be 1,000 times more than the number of marks who are going to be literature professors. So when your ratio is so skewed towards more marks being truck drivers, the answer to who will like to listen to Mozart is also likely to be a truck driver. And actually that was the right answer. So most respondents went wrong because they went by their stereotypes. They went by their anecdotal thinking and not by data-driven thinking. How do we apply this to business? How do we apply this to investing? Let me give you an example. We normally evaluate markets by looking at their prices or the level of price. So this is the chart of Sensex for the last 22 years. At its low, this is the chart of the valuation of Sensex, not the Sensex, the valuation of Sensex for the last 22 years. What is this chart showing? So we all know that over time, the journey of Sensex is up. It trends up. What does this chart show? This is not trending up. This goes up, then comes down, goes up, comes down. So the valuation of the asset class is always cyclical. The journey of the asset class is always trending upwards with ups and downs in between, but the valuation is always mean reverting. It goes up to a certain threshold and then it comes down. It falls up to a certain threshold where a lot of money then comes in because it's attractive at lower valuations. So, sensible investors start putting more money, and then the valuation cycle turns again. So this data over 22 years says, and this is what base rates for valuation of Sensex indicate, that at its low, the valuation of Nifty is around 10 PE, and at its peak, the valuation of Nifty is roughly 30 PE. These are the ranges. What it also shows is when you buy something cheap at lower price, like what Ben Graham said, you make better returns. When you buy something very expensive, the way you buy perfumes, you don't make better returns, because then the seller of the perfume will make better returns. But if you buy anything cheap, you will make better returns. When are stocks cheap? That's reflected in the valuation of the market. So the valuation of the market is cheapest in phases of crisis. So the 2000 technology bubble, when it burst, the valuations were at 10 times. Since then, if you had invested in Sensex, just the basic Sensex, returns that you would have made over 22 years is a stellar 14% return. Next time, valuations were as cheap again in the bottom of the 2002-03 economic slowdown. Indian economy had slowed down after the tech bubble had burst, And after September 11 had happened in US, where world over there was a massive slowdown. So the environment was negative and stock prices were reflecting that negativity. They were all at 10, 11, 12 PE. Some of the best consumer companies, which are today at 40, 50, 60, 70 price earning multiples, were also at 15 times multiple. Market since then has given 16.8% return. Then the next time there was a crisis was in 2008, 2009 global financial crisis. And anyone who invested in those lows, returns made were around 12.6. When did we have a similar crisis very recently? Was in 2020 March, when because of corona fear, stock markets fell by 40%. And whoever could invest in the month of March in a very quick time has made 39% return. But of course, this 39 is less precious than the 14.1 of 2000, because that 14.1 is over a 20-year period. This 39 is only over the last 20-week period. So, in real terms, it's not very large. But what is the summary here? That if you buy something cheap, you make higher returns. If you buy something expensive, now let's see if you buy anything at the peak of a market cycle. So if we bought anything at the peak of the technology bubble in the year 2000, since then the return of the market is 11.5. Now 11.5 today looks very attractive because interest rates are low. But 11.5 for an investor 20 years back is not very attractive, because that time even the Government of India bond fund was earning 13% return. So if we had bought a Government of India bond for 20 years, we would have made 12% return with a very linear return profile. Whereas stocks also gave us only 11.5%. Then if we bought something in the peak of valuations in 2007-8 cycle, when India's economy was growing at 10%, our GDP was growing at 10%, profitability was growing at 25%, return on equity for corporate India was 21%. With such great data points, with such a fast raging economy, such a speed runway, since then if we had invested in stocks till today, 13 years have gone, the return on Nifty or Sensex is only 6%, similar to what a savings account would have given. And very recently, in recent times, 2017, 18, 19 peaks when markets have been expensive, since then till today, even though we are again at lifetime high, the last 3-year return is just 0.2. Net, the summary I'm saying is, what does base rate tell us right now? Forget the story that the governments will give us, that reserve banks will give us, that experts may give us. When you invest in very expensive markets, future returns are lower. When you invest in very cheap markets, future returns are higher. These are the extreme truths of investing, and markets temporarily go to those extremes. Most of the times are in between. Currently, markets are again at extremes because this time what has happened, because of COVID, the earnings are temporarily depressed, but because of liquidity, the stock prices are permanently high. Logically, for an economic shock like this, where economy is growing at negative rates, stocks should be much lower, but there is so much of money which is chasing stocks world over that they are higher than what they deserve. And that is a very unusual situation. So one of the rules of investing is don't invest on stories and narratives, make in India story, power reforms, India will be a $5 trillion economy, so you'll make a lot of money. All of that is there in the price. Respect the price. The price is the best indicator of what is the risk in investing and how much of that risk is captured in the price. So just be aware of that. Likewise, the same concept of base rates can be applied in many dimensions. It can be applied in fixed income. It can be applied in extrapolating whether this company can grow at 20% for the next 10 years or not. Yesterday, someone was saying that TCS has crossed the valuations of Accenture, and some broker who had earlier said this stock deserves 20p multiple actually came with a report that the stock now deserves 40 multiple because the world is digitizing and TCS is pivoting its business model. So we are willing to give 40 multiple. Now at 40 multiple, the growth rate that it implies means in the next 10 years TCS will become bigger than Microsoft. Now, is that a valid reality? Is what base rates can tell us that how many Indian companies in their history have become bigger than the largest company in the world. That means that the valuation of 40 times is not a sensible valuation. And as investors, we should not get carried away with that. The next rule to avoid accidents and to not lose too much of money is not to chase overconfidence, is not to chase certainty, is not to go behind high conviction opinion and view where people thumb the table and say this will happen. I see many experts who say that India is the mother of all bull run. Tell me, if we were the mother of all bull run, would investors make, in this entire journey, the average profit growth of corporate India has been 6 to 7% per annum, because large part of corporate India have not been able to grow profits at a high run rate, because either we had accidents in our banking system, then we had accidents in telecom, large amount of profitability got eroded, then the power sector went through crisis, then metals and energy stock crashed world over. So the only part of India which is holding up is where consumers are buying products, whether it's consumption or healthcare or IT. That is where capital efficiency is very good, business models are robust. But today they are all available at 2 times of the valuation that they would have been available in past times. So just be conscious not to get carried away with very confident remarks. Now, what I would like to just ask this question to all of you people in India, respect or like movie stars and like cricket. So if I were to ask anyone, I'm asking you 2 questions, and your answer has to be a one-line answer, and you cannot go wrong in your answer. So I would urge all of you to reply through the chat mode the answer to this question. My first question is, how many runs has Sachin scored in his entire cricket career? Of course, I want to put one condition, that if you go wrong in your answer, all of you have to pay 1,000 rupees to me. You have to transfer 1,000 rupees in my bank account. So there is a penalty if you go wrong. Now I want to pose the question that how many runs has Sachin scored in his entire career? Very quickly, if anyone wants to give the answer, please do that in the chat box. All of you can, whoever has access, just type it in the chat box. Put whatever one-line answer that you have. And my second question is, how many movies has Amitabh acted in? I'll wait for half a minute, and once I see some of the answers, I will continue ahead. So I want some participation from the audience that will also confirm to me that I'm speaking to an awake audience and not an audience which is preparing for the long weekend. I'm not seeing any responses. Can you help me? Team Edelweiss, Tanya, is it something, can you see on your chat box any of the responses?
There isn't any response. I just see one of the gentlemen writing, not sure.
Okay, okay, fine. Who's that? Who said not sure?
He is Mr. Vishesh.
Okay, fine. So let us hold that. I just need 1 or 2 more comments. If the audience can be a bit more sporty and give those answers. Okay, so Vishesh only is writing don't know, but no one else is commenting. Okay, now whenever I do this survey, normally what I realize is most people give a precise number. Someone says 32,000 runs, someone says 24,000 runs, someone says Amitabh has acted in 100 movies, someone will say 400 movies, and likewise. And every answer, which is a finite answer, is actually a wrong answer, because it's very rare for our human mind to remember an actual number unless you've really studied statistics. But if you still want, so most people end up losing the bet. They answer with a finite number but lose the game. But those people who answer with less certainty but with probability are the real winners. So someone like a Vishesh who said, I don't know. It's fine to say I don't know if you don't know. He said not sure. Or someone says almost 30,000, around 30,000 runs. Now that's a smarter answer. Or someone would say a wide range between 10,000 to 40,000. You're going to be right when you're giving a range. Or if you say Amitabh has acted between 200 to 500 movies, 100% chance that your answer will be right. But the closer you try to bring your range, the closer you narrow down your range of outcomes, we go wrong. And the learning that I'm trying to highlight here, the message I'm giving is look for probabilities and range of outcomes, not for certainties and one precise outcome. It's okay to be largely right in terms of direction, or it's okay to be less precise. false certainty is more dangerous than true uncertainty, because the world is uncertain. So, and we cannot keep, betting on certainty in our investment decision. That would be the biggest accident we would make. So just be aware that asset classes have diverse return profiles. Different phases, different asset classes do well. There was a phase when Indian markets were beating Nasdaq hollow for a long period of 10 years, between 2000 to 2010. In fact, Nasdaq was negative and India was up 14%. Then in the next decade, 2010 to till today, India's dollar return is almost zero and Nasdaq dollar returns is roughly around 12%. So the whole cycle has changed. Between 2005 to 2014, gold did very well. Between 2014 to 2020 or 19, gold didn't go anywhere. And then suddenly again, gold has done well. So asset classes have different journeys and it's very difficult to time them. So being aware of probabilities. So don't get carried away with if someone says that, yahan se now only gold will do well, or from here only Indian markets will do well. Today, it is fashionable to say that from here, US stocks will do well or Nasdaq will do well, because last 5 years that has been doing well. So just be conscious of not buying what is very popular today, because what is very popular has already run up. And I want to, so how do you really, then still invest your money? So I want to tell you one very interesting, scientific concept. I have in this whole group, a lot of engineers or people who know physics and chemistry, they will understand this concept much better. I'll try to simplify for the rest of the world. Now there are two, there is this concept called MOHS scale. It is a scale of hardness of a certain metal. Now, the hardest metal in the world is diamond. We all know that. It's very difficult to break a diamond. And the weakest weakest element is powder. Diamond has an MOHS score of 10. So MOHS is basically a measure of hardness. MOH, it's a measure of hardness. Diamond is 10, powder is 1. If you take on MOHS scale a metal like tin, for example, it will have a hardness of around 1.5. It's fairly weak. It's not really very strong. Then you take another metal which is copper. Copper will have a hardness of somewhere around 3. So when you mix the two now, and remember both these metals, if you see, this is the world map. If you see where are these metals largely present, geographically they are not present in proximity. They are all present in very extreme parts of the world. So copper, for example, is present in the Asia and the Southeast Asia sort of countries like China, Russia, China and mainly Indonesia and Burma. These are the 3 pockets where the largest mines of copper are. And on the other hand, tin is available on the other side, which is extremes like north of Russia, or on the other side towards southern American countries like Mexico or Peru, some of these countries. So they are available on extreme points. So even to think of bringing them together is not very easy. Now there was some scientist who, through his science and his chemical experiments, thought of putting the two elements together. Now when you bring these 2 elements together of 1.3 and 1.5 and 3 together, what should the average be? The average should be 1.5 plus 3, which is 4.5, divided by 2. It should come to 2.25. So when you blend these 2 metals together, their average hardness, their MOHS score should ideally have been 2.25. But when tin and copper come together, it creates another metal, another very precious metal called bronze. And the MOHS score of bronze is actually 6. It is harder than even iron. Iron is 5.5. So by blending 2 elements together, you are able to enhance the hardness more than the individual characteristics of these 2 metals. Now this, in our world, in the world of investing, is called great low correlation. 2 asset classes which are far away, which operate in opposite direction, but when they come together, their collective behavior is actually far more superior to their individual behavior. And this is called very good principle of diversification. This is called low correlation diversification. Let me explain this with an investment principle. Now here I've just taken over the last 15, 16 years, four basic asset classes which have low correlation with each other. So they are like the tin and the copper of the world, where they are far away from each other. Their behaviors generally are opposite to each other or not in sync with each other. So when gold does well, stocks don't do well. When stocks do well, government bonds don't do well. Let's say last 2 years, stocks have gone down, but government bonds have gone up world over. Like I was telling, in the last decade, bonds have risen more than stocks. So then correlation between Indian stocks and global stocks, that correlation is half. So half the times they move together, half the times they move in opposite direction. So if you put all these four asset classes together and you build a fund which we call as don't predict fund, it means you don't need to really predict when will which do well, and you don't have to worry about that. That don't predict fund has generated a long-term return of 11.6%, which can be seen by the lower NAV line. And this NAV line has a far more stable journey. It's very gradually trending upwards. It has very less fluctuations or shocks. Compare that to Nifty. Nifty's long-term return is around 13% today, especially even with being at the peak of the market. Normally, market peaks are irrational. So even at an irrational level, Nifty has only given 13 versus 11.6 of this blended asset class, mixed portfolio. In fact, just 6 months back, the Nifty return had dropped to 11.2 and the don't predict return was 11.4. So you get a far more steady journey when you mix the four asset classes. Actually, when you mathematically do the averaging of bonds, gold, US stocks and Indian stocks, the average will come to 10.6. But the hybrid portfolio is coming to 11.6. So this is like the hardness of bronze being higher than the constituents. Here, the returns of the blended portfolio over a longer period of time is higher than the average of all four. This concept, in our language, we call it asset allocation. This concept allows us to avoid being overconfident of what does the future hold in store. So most people who have a very definitive view about the future actually can go wrong far often. In fact, the wise men are less confident about the future. The arrogant men are more confident about the future in the world of investing. So keep that principle in mind. The principle of low correlation, blending the right asset classes together. And then, how do you really go about doing it? So sometimes it doesn't mean you have to put all four asset classes, which is bonds, gold, US equities, which is Russell 1000, and Nifty together in equal ratio. One option is to do 25 each. Other option could be to optimize that in these four. If in recent times the worst performer is Nifty, instead of 25% in Nifty, let me have 40 in Nifty and reduce exposure to some other asset class. So that can be a layer of smart asset allocation which you can do along with your advisor, and that can help you reduce risk in your portfolio to get the same level of return, or for the same level of risk, enhance your returns. One thumb rule that we personally follow at DSP is around valuations and interest rates. When valuations are very low, going back to the base rate slide, when valuations are very low, normally aggressive equity portfolios make very high returns in the future. So here we have shown that when valuations, the P ranges are between 10 to 15 or 10 to 18, stick to aggressive equity funds, small cap funds, mid cap funds, not when valuations are very high. Then when valuations are reasonable, stick to hybrid funds like equity and bond funds. And when valuations are very expensive, like today, the best risk-adjusted portfolio are asset allocation funds directly, or you split your 100 rupees across 3 or 4 asset classes. On the other hand, applying the same principle of base rates in fixed income, when interest rates are very low, our portfolio should have lower maturity debt funds. When interest rates are very high, closer to 9%, our portfolio should have higher maturity debt funds. Why this range of 6 to 9? Because as per base rates, as per the history of interest rates in India, over the last 20 years, generally interest rates, the lower range of interest rates are around 5 to 6%. The higher range of interest rates are around 9 to 9.5%. So when rates are very high, we should take advantage by expanding the duration of our portfolio. When rates are very low, we should take advantage by reducing the maturity of our fund, so that when interest rates turn, we don't have to worry about higher fluctuation. The last thing I want to highlight is, there are a lot of investors who have this belief that, stocks are better and not funds, because the last few year returns in stocks in equity funds have not been good. What I want to tell you is returns are always fluctuating. They are never linear. If the long-term return of equity is likely to be, let's say, 10% CAGR or X% CAGR, you will never get 10% every year. There will be 4-5 years of 30% returns. There will be 4-5 years of zero returns. There will be a year of two of negative 10-20% return. So there will be different ranges of returns in different cycles. Right now, all of us are going through a range of poor returns. That does not mean the next 5 years will be bad. In fact, there will be a phase when returns will lift upwards. As investors, we need to play through that cycle and not, get afraid with short bouts of volatility. I want to illustrate that with a very important story. This is a story of SIP. This is not just systematic investment plan. This is also a story of Shiva, Indra, and Parvati, the three gods and goddess. So there was a year when it didn't rain in India. So there was a huge drought, and farmers are very much affected by that because they were not getting rains or adequate water to go and take care of their cattle and plow their fields. So this was a small village where there were 100 farmers, a group of 100 farmers who were friends. So they came together after 2 months of drought and they said, let's go to the Lord of Rains, Lord Indra, and request him, go and pray to him. When they go and pray to him that God, we request you to give us rains so our livelihoods don't suffer. But Indra said lockdown, so please come to me after a few months. I can't do anything right now. If you want, go to the next temple where Shiva is there. Check with him if he wants to help you. So all of these farmers go back to Shiva, and Shiva says that I'm also right now in a relaxed mode, in a switch off mode, so I can't help you right now. Come back after 6 months. Also, for it to rain, I have to actually play my drum because rains fall only when they listen to the music of my drum. And right now, I am not in the mood to play my drum for the next few months. So I request you guys to come back after 6 months. All these farmers go back and they start, they stop going to their field. They just start filing their time. They start playing cards. They live on their past savings. There was only one farmer in this whole group who says that I will ignore what my other friends are doing. I will do what's my duty. My duty is to farm. My duty is to my fields, to my cattle, and to the art of farming. If I stop farming for 6 months, I will lose the art of farming. I will lose the practice of farming. I will become a poor farmer. I don't want to give up on that technique. So I will wake up every day as per my time. I will go and do what I'm supposed to do. Let Shiva and Indra do what is their job. Let me do what is my job. So he continues to, go to the field every day. Looking at his discipline every day. Goddess Parvati gets, very impressed, and she learns from him. And she then goes to Shiva and says that, I'm worried for you. Hearing from what this farmer said, he said, if I stop farming for 6 months, I will lose the technique of farming. Now, likewise, if you stop playing your drums for 6 months, you will stop, you will not be able to play them well. And then rains will stop responding to your drums. They will lose respect for you, and you will become less effective. Now think, so this farmer was continuously farming for the last few weeks and months. And here, when Shiva and Parvati have this conversation, Shiva suddenly realized that, yes, I think this makes sense. While I will still wait for a few more months before I actually start playing drums, but let me just try and see whether I can practice it and whether I've, not lost touch. So he starts playing the drums. And as soon as he starts playing the drums, it starts raining. And when it rains, the only farmer who benefits is the one out of 100 who is doing his duty. Now, this is exactly what happens in investing. In investing, in every cycle, when stock prices are rising, a lot of people come in, and when for a year or two they stagnate, 90% of people get out, and 10% continue with their discipline of, doing what they are supposed to do. Investing is a marathon. It's not a short-term race. It's not T20. It's a test match. It is a marathon of 20, 30 years. 1 year, 3 year, 5 year is very short-term. It does not really create wealth. So I'll give you evidence. Between 2000 to 2003, those 4 years when the economy was going through a rough patch, stocks were coming down. Markets gave zero return. Your 100 rupees after 4 years was also 100 rupees. But in those 48 months, whoever did an SIP across those 48 months, invested small amounts, their return after those 4 years till today, their return in those 4 years was 13%. Likewise, in the financial crisis in 2008 till 2014, 60 months where market returns were zero, 100 rupees remained 100 rupees. We invested one time 100, we waited for 5 years, markets gave zero because first markets fell by 50 and then they doubled, but net they were still at the same level. Our returns were zero. But an investor who kept on doing monthly SIPs rather than buying one shot everything, kept on buying across those 60 months, his return per annum was 9%. So 0 versus 9, great difference. This is the power of continuity, discipline, and constantly taking advantage of falling prices or not putting too much of money when prices are rising. So today, when you put a lot of lump sum, I would not encourage that because markets are very high. And when markets are very high, generally in the next 2-3 years, you see volatility, you see prices coming down. And the best way to capture them is by doing SIPs. So lastly, what I would like to just quickly close with is today, there are different types of investor anxieties. Some investors want money because the lockdown has impacted either our businesses, our compensation, our investments, our cash flows. Then in such an environment, don't rely on short-term market to take care of your cash flows. Take the money out. If you need money, this is a good time to take money out. On the other hand, there are some investors who don't need money, but who just have this fear that if my own business is not doing well, why should stocks do well? Someday prices will fall. My view, we cannot predict when will they fall or when will they rise. But if you have a very strong view, prices will fall. Don't go against your view. You can move from equity to a lower equity product like a balance fund, which has 70 rupees in equity, or a dynamic asset allocation fund, which can adjust equity exposure. Why am I saying this? So that, let's say you have a view markets will fall, but imagine markets don't fall, but they run up. Whatever equity still is there in a balance fund or asset allocation fund, will take advantage of that run up. And if prices fall, that debt component will get reinvested at lower prices and still work in your favor over the cycle. So both ways it will benefit you. Third view, some people say that, I don't think prices will fall nominally, they will crash. They will again see a 20-30% crash like in the month of March. Now, again, like I said, these are all conjectures. No one has an answer. In hindsight, we know whether prices will go up or down, but in foresight, we never know. But if you have a very strong view that prices are going to crash, what do a lot of people do? They take the money out, they keep it in the bank account. And when actually prices are low, you're not able to put the money back. We, out of fear, just freeze and stay away. On 23rd March, when prices were down at all-time low in this cycle, hardly anyone could invest money. So how do you solve for that behavioral error? If you believe you want to be safe, then keep money in debt fund or put your money in debt funds and start a 1-year systematic transfer plan. So whenever prices crash, every month through a monthly transfer plan, you are acquiring some amount of equity as an asset class. Someone says, no, I'm done with equities. I don't want to ever be in equities. If you want to have that view, then okay, go and be in a debt fund. But then when prices eventually go up, because eventually stock markets always rise, because economies always progress, eventually prices are always higher, then don't regret that I took this decision and now markets have run up. Today, a lot of investors are reeling under regret that, I exited, unfortunately, in the month of March and lost out. So I think that is the final takeaway from my side. Diversify. Future is unknown. It's a fight between zero interest rates and poor fundamentals or poor economic growth. When will economic growth come back? I think still some time away. We'll have to wait and watch for that. We don't see that happening in a hurry world over, including India. Until that time, it will be a conflict between fundamentals and liquidity and interest rates. You have to be balanced and take advantage of both. Don't anchor your portfolio only to one view, which is a view about either a slowdown or a bounce back. There can be multiple probabilities. Fast growth coming back, or all economies going into a longer recession if the COVID problem worsen. If we see wave 2 happening, and you never know, we have to wait and watch in the next 6 months to 1 year. If there is no new vaccine coming and if COVID cases continue to rise, we will see more lockdowns again and economies can go into a recession. Some part of your portfolio should defend you against that recession or even benefit from that recession. So owning, long-term government bonds is a hedge against recession. Then, if at all that doesn't happen, but in the last 6 months all the demand has been curtailed, no new capacity has come up, no new oil plants have come, no new refineries are being set up, and suddenly growth comes back and energy prices shoot up and inflation starts coming back, then is your portfolio prepared for that? So some part of your portfolio should play for high inflation, whether it is gold or natural resources companies or that type of investments. With your advisor at Edelweiss, ask for these scenarios that, what is the possibility of scenario 1, 2, 3, 4, and let me have some exposure for each of the scenario. Form your view. So my view, for example, somehow, my portfolio I wanted to show here, it's got deleted. My personal portfolio today is broken up as 40 rupees in equity funds, solid companies, world-class Indian companies, no leverage on the balance sheet, but they are slightly expensive. Another 40 rupees is in short-term bond funds where they will benefit from interest rates continuously coming down, but they will also give me enough capital cushion if markets were to turn volatile, and when prices fall, if I want to buy more equities, I can dip it into this 40 and add more in equity. So 40 is in equities, best in class stocks, in our equity funds. 40 rupees is in our short term fund. Another 15 rupees is in gold and energy funds, funds which invest in companies which mine gold. Now that is a proxy exposure to gold as an asset class, and it benefits if gold prices were to go up. It will benefit if world over all currencies come down or collapse, because there is a very high risk that central banks around the world, which are constantly printing more and more currency, more and more paper, someday will lose control of market. People will lose faith on these currencies, and gold again will become a savior of last resort. So some part of gold is important. How do I express my view on gold? Partly by buying sovereign gold bonds, which give you 2.5% returns plus the stock plus the difference in gold prices. Or we have a very interesting fund which invests in gold mining companies. So that gives you an indirect exposure to gold. So 40, 40, 15, and the last 5 rupees is in hedge fund. So we have a hedge fund where we can buy put options and protect. If let's say the valuations were to come down, stocks were to fall, the put option can actually in a very disciplined way defend the portfolio. So in a month like March, when all my equity funds fell by 30%, this portfolio was actually up by 2%. So that's the benefit of tail risk hedging. We call it tail risk hedging. Again, teams at Edelweiss can guide you about that. So with that, I come to the end of my session. Stay safe. Don't be part of crowds, whether it means in our day-to-day life. Stay away from crowds to avoid contagion and the virus. And in your portfolios also, stay away from the wisdom of crowds. Have your own wisdom, have your own independent thought, and then take your decision. Over to you, Tanya. Thank you very much for being patient and listening to me.
Thank you so much, Kalpen. That was really insightful. I see a lot of questions that have been written. I would want to take a few, and we can then take it up to the end of our session. So the very first question that I have is: we are in the last quarter of 2020. How would you summarize this year that has gone by, and what can an investor look forward to in 2021?
I answered this upfront and I repeat that. If you can see the screen, 2020 was V-shaped, falling economy, rising stock prices. I think the next few quarters will also be V-shaped. It could mean rising economic growth because growth will come back, but the stock prices could come down a bit because they've run up a lot. Or it can continue to be V-shaped. Basically, what I mean to say is that there will be significant amount of two-way movements. There will be quarters when markets will fall by 10-20%, and then there will be quarters when they'll run up again. It will be less orderly. It will be more in terms of fluctuation. And as investors, which is why diversify your portfolio across 4 to 5 core asset classes, which is stocks, Indian and global, bonds, mainly Indian, because global stocks are up, almost at zero interest rate. So mainly Indian bonds, gold, and real estate. And any asset class which can defend you against inflation. In my case, I would love to own real estate, but I am not yet buying real estate in Mumbai because prices are still, crazy and irrational. If bonds can give me 6 to 7% yield, whereas rental yield in Mumbai is still 2%, it doesn't make sense to buy real estate. But if, as investors, you have a choice of buying real estate in different parts of the country, it could be a good time to gradually start looking at real estate. So look at all the 5 asset classes, look at a ratio which suits your temperament and your time horizon. My allocation, which I shared, which was 40, 40, 15 and 5, was a function of my needs, my need to buy a house some point in time if I require, my appetite as being a very conservative investor. I cannot I don't like too much of fluctuation in my portfolio, and markets are very at much higher levels right now. I rather be more cautious. At its peak, my 40 rupees of equity can go as high as 70, 75 in equity, but I never cross 70. I always keep 25, 30 rupees, away from equity, to keep that much of cushion as my safety buffer, which can be in gold or in bonds. Your risk, as an investor, your ratio could be 50, 50, 60, 40, 40, 60, clearly a function of your time horizon and your opinion on the market. What I also want to tell you is that when you hear from experts, you don't have to replicate that, because each individual is unique. Medicines are different for different patients and different treatment. So personal finance is personal. So, just understand the principles from me and then apply it to your context and accordingly build your portfolio. Next question.
Kalpin, the other question that I have is, there's very interesting news about, RBI deciding to buy state government bonds via open operation. So there are a few people who really want to know what is the impact going to be on the bond market.
So basically, see what has happened in the last 5-6 months. RBI has pumped in 6 lakh crores worth of liquidity. RBI has cut rates very aggressively in the last 1 year. So the overnight money market rates, or repo rate, is 4%, but Government of India bonds are quoting at 6%, and state government bonds. So Government of India bond is like Amitabh. State government bonds are like Abhishek. Sons of the Government of India. So even though they are sovereign or quasi-sovereign, their interest rates are very elevated. So central government bonds at 6%, state loans like Maharashtra, Karnataka, Kerala, West Bengal, Orissa, UP, they are all at 670, 680, 7%. So the overnight rate to state development loan rate gap is very high. What is RBI indicating in a way, saying that we will come and buy these bonds, and they want to. So there is a bit of disbelief in the market right now that interest rates in India cannot stay so low, because India as a country needs capital and the government doesn't have capital. Our tax collections are low, our growth rates are low. Where is the capital going to come? See, we are not a US where the whole world is wanting to go and give capital. At 0% interest rates also, the world wants to buy government bonds of US, because dollar is a strong currency. In India, people think 10 times that, okay, I will buy the government bond at 6% today. 5 years from now, when I want to sell and take it back in my country, let's say an American wants to do that, he has to convert the dollar back into rupee and rupee back into dollar. But every year the rupee loses 4%. So what he will earn eventually is going to be only 2%, with the risk of Indian volatility. So because we are not a strong currency, most people believe we are not likely to see interest rates for low for too long. RBI is trying to signal. So it's again a battle between the messaging of RBI and the wisdom of the markets. Market wisdom says rates will not go low for too long. RBI is giving a signal that I am there. I will come and buy government bonds. So they've done an OMO for central government bonds, and today they've announced an OMO for state development loans. It's a messaging point. How effective will it be? Time will tell when the open market operations happen over the course of next few weeks. So at what price do they do these OMOs? So RBI may say I'm willing to do it at 6.70, but the market says no, I want 7. We'll have to see how effective it is. So I would say wait and watch, but broadly the direction of this means interest rates will trend lower for some time and remain stable for some time before they move up, which means the benefit of this will be seen in bond funds, in debt funds, which have long duration bonds in the portfolio. So that is where investors will see some advantage for the next couple of months.
Kalpin, before I continue with more questions, I have many people who have been showering compliments on the session being so great, and they have been able to get a lot of knowledge. I would encourage few more people to share their takeaways from this session so that we can improvise on all our upcoming webinars.
Yeah, actually, what I would request all of you is just put your one-line takeaways, so that we know that what is the quality of our messaging or the simplicity of our messaging? Are we able to convey to you things that matter or not? And that also acts as good feedback and input for us.
So while we await for the feedback, I have few more interesting questions for you. I have a gentleman, his name is Manish. He is saying that why gold mining fund and not gold ETF?
Yeah. Okay, so Manish, both make sense. In fact, definitely ETFs also, make sense. See, I'll tell you why do I do gold mining fund, and again, my reasons are my personal reasons. Don't have to be your reasons. I work in my company, which actually runs the gold mining fund, so we are aware. So we know the mechanics of gold mining companies. Now, typically, what happens is gold mining stocks have roughly 2 times the sensitivity to gold prices. So if gold prices change by a unit of 1, gold mining stock prices change by a unit of 1.5 to 2. So when gold prices go up by 35%, which they've done in the last year, gold mining stocks have gone up by 2x of that, which is 70%. Now this works the other way around also. When gold prices fall by 20%, gold mining stocks will also fall by 40%. So they are a leveraged version of gold prices. Gold ETF will give you the movement of gold prices. Gold mining fund will give you 1.5 times the movement of gold prices. Very volatile. Normally what I do is, whenever the NAVs are down by 10-15%, like they have been in the last 4 to 5 weeks, is when I'll add some money. I generally avoid buying at, very high prices. You invest in the volatility, in downward volatility. So now, there is a very high chance that the whole world is talking gold now. Gold from $1,400 has now gone up to $2,100. For all you know, if stable growth comes back and the whole economic environment starts settling down, the fear, subsides and people go and dump gold again. And $2,100 will come down to $1,800. Then gold ETFs will also not make money, and gold mining fund also will not make money. So that risk is prevalent today because you're not buying it low, you're buying it high. But I personally still feel that my overall portfolio did not have any gold, over the last 20 years. Only in the last 2 years I started adding gold because stocks were very expensive, bond yields were very low, so both were not making sense. So I said, let's look at some other asset class, which is not very expensive. So today, for example, which asset class is underowned? Which asset class is hated, where people are running away? It's energy. It's oil, oil as an asset class, gas as an asset class, energy companies, their stocks are at 10-year, 20-year low. So some part of the portfolio can be a part of a theme like this, with awareness that you can still go wrong and still not make money. See, no investment decision guarantees success upfront. You get to know only towards the end of the cycle. So that's the reason why I prefer gold mining, because if I have to buy 20% in gold exposure, I have to put 20 rupees for a gold ETF. But through a gold mining fund, effectively I'm putting only 10 rupees, and the balance 10 I can still stay in a short-term bond and earn 6% coupon. So that's my way of thinking about it. By the way, thanks to a lot of you who have actually given answers to my question on Sachin's score and Amitabh's movies. But as you notice, all the answers are finite answers, and in investing, don't try to seek finite answers. That's one message I would like to give it to all of you. Next question.
So I have a question which says that according to you, when do you see Nifty to be fairly valued with regards to GDP and profitability?
Yeah, so I think it will happen only when the excess liquidity in the world starts slowing down, and I don't see that happening in a hurry, because for every small problem, central banks are coming into, give a new stimulus and print more and more currency, including India. So I don't see that in the near term, not in the near visibility, next few quarters. But one way in which this can happen can be when markets lose confidence and faith. It needs a negative event for that to happen. For example, there was no reason in a world of plenty liquidity in March for stock prices to fall by 40%, because liquidity was still ample. But the fear of survival, the fear of death, the fear of all economies in the world, choking one shot on one fine day, everyone announces lockdowns. That fear made everyone sell very quickly, and when all these trades accelerate, uh, uh, prices move to the other extreme very fast. So only when money starts moving away from equity funds globally and in India, can a scenario like that happen. I don't see that in the near term right now. Uh, what can be another trigger for that? The another trigger could be a wave 2 of COVID, particularly in India. So let's say unlock 5 is happening right now. People will start moving around, people will start mixing around. And if that creates another round of increase in COVID cases and the government panics and comes with more stringent measures for lockdown, then the market will react and fall. So that would be one reason when P's can come down, because the P will come down. The other way in which P can come down is not for stocks to fall, but E to go up. When earnings go up, so the fear that all of us have been having, that the lockdown will permanently damage many companies and businesses, if that fear is unfound and maybe some signals are coming, a lot of companies are bouncing back. So you take most of the large banks and NBFCs, their recoveries are again very strong. Look at auto companies, their sales growth has inflected up very sharply in the month of September. Cement sales have started turning growing fast. uh, Pharma companies are again back to peak volumes. So if pockets of businesses revive earnings very fast, then the earning growth will be so fast that the P's will normalize. But if you are looking for 17-18 P in today's world, looks unlikely. Interest rates have to rise for that. So if interest rates world over rise up, then P's will normalize. I don't see any of that happening in the next 2 to 4 quarters at this point in time. Maybe some, and forecasting these things is very rare. People like Warren Buffett say that we have never forecasted interest rates. We have never forecasted any macro variable because they are not in our control. Thousands of variables interplay, and it's very difficult to process them. So because you can't forecast any of them, what you do is opposite. You look for margin of safety, that I am having these asset classes, so much of equity, so much of bonds. So if my view goes wrong, what can be the worst case loss for my asset class? And how do I reduce that? How do I keep it under control? So design. So coming back to the topic of the session, forecasting macro is like predicting the rains. Proper scientific asset allocation is like building the ark. What is easy? Not predicting the rains. Building the ark is more easy. So I think, go back to the drawing board to say, where is the risk high? So personally, I feel the risk is high in stocks today, in quality stocks. I feel the risk is high in, in bond prices to some extent, because yields have come down. The risk may be a bit less in gold. So accordingly, you build your portfolio.
Kalpin, I have a very interesting question by Mr. Shirish Rege. He's asking, what is your view of Russian market trading at 5.5 PE?
Okay, so I don't have a view because I don't understand that market. I've never analyzed or studied that market. So my view, it's like, you are asking an engineer to treat you for medicine. So my view has no meaning, to be honest. All I know is that Russian market is largely dominated by energy companies. And energy companies are at their all-time low or 10-year low. They are all quoting at 6, 7, 8 price to earning multiple, because the prices have collapsed by 30-40% in the last few years. But these P's will actually optically look lower because now earnings have collapsed. First oil prices come down, then earnings come down. So in the next 2 quarters, as their profits come down or they start making losses, the P's will look very high then. Number one. So Russian market is largely driven by energy. Russian markets are also fairly opaque because of huge state influence. So you need, maybe far better insights to how it works. I don't have those insights. I've never tracked, but I've just given you two bird's eye view comments. It doesn't mean these markets are not good or you can't make money, but you have to really time them very well, get in and get out at the right time. So you need a slightly deeper study of that. What are the constituents? When do these constituents actually do well? So what is the range of Russian markets in terms of valuation? Is it towards the lower end of the range or the higher end? And accordingly, you should take a call. So in the past, when it was at 5 PE, for how long did it remain at 5 PE? Or did it start turning? Look at those type of data points. Take a corollary in India. Public sector banks, public sector companies have been at 7-8 P for the last 7-8 years now. But no one is putting faith in them because the market feels that anywhere where the government is involved, such companies are never going to be scalable or profitable. So even if they are very cheap, very attractive, market currently does not have confidence on them. So I think study series a bit more in detail. Look out for people who understand that space and then form your opinion.
Thank you so much, Kalpin. While I take the last question, I have received many people thanking you for the session. It has been really insightful. The concepts, the thoughts were communicated in the most simple manner with examples. This is especially written by Ruchi. So everybody is giving you a very, very positive feedback on this session.
Thank you.
So the very last question that I would want to take is your advice on small cap fund versus multi-cap SIP.
Multi-cap SIP in one line. See, we run a very successful small cap fund. It's called DSC Small Cap Fund. It has a stellar track record over 13 years. Done very well. Has its shares of ups and downs. Between 2018 to 20, all small cap funds came down. We actually kept our fund shut because when prices run up a lot, we generally close down our fund, and when prices fall, so in April we reopened the fund to take new money in. So it depends on your overall asset allocation. But what I would still suggest is you and I are not going to meet again for me to tell you that okay, now from multi-cap or from small cap move to mid cap, etc. So if in your overall portfolio you do not have any small cap and you want to do a small cap SIP, then it's fine. But if you don't want to worry about the volatility that comes every few years in the small cap universe, then prefer a multi-cap fund, which will have the right measure across large cap, mid cap, and small cap. And secondly, just one more important point I want to convey is don't invest in labels. Small cap versus large cap, these are labels. These are very bad narratives that have emerged in the industry. Growth style versus value style is a label. ESG investing versus regular investing, these are all labels. These are all fads. What is important is, are you buying good companies? Are you buying solid companies at good prices? So as long as your portfolio manager has good small cap companies, good large cap companies, that's what matters. Market cap does not matter beyond a point. The biggest accidents in the last 5 years have happened in large caps also. The largest public sector banks had huge amount of NPAs. They had huge amount of governance issues. The largest private sector banks had large corporate NPAs. The largest telecom companies actually had 40-50,000 crores of losses. The largest steel and energy companies have seen overall 20,000 crores of losses on their balance sheet. So large can make losses. On the other hand, small can also have accidents. So what is important is good large companies, good mid-sized companies, and good small companies. That is more important than the market cap. And a good portfolio manager who runs a good multi-cap fund will navigate you through various cycles. Whenever we are in huge panic, like in March, on those times, without asking anyone, go and invest in small cap fund. But right now we are not in panic mode. We have, all stocks have recovered. All NAVs have gone up by 40 to 60%. Even my small cap fund would be up some 57% from its low in March. So they've all got fully priced in now. There's no, extra delta that you're going to make out of them. So stick to multi-cap in that context.
Well, that brings us to the end of the webinar. Kalpin, I would request you to say a few words to our audience before we sign off.
I think I've said many words, and I'll just summarize by saying that don't predict, don't be certain, be always cautious, be independent, respect data, look for evidence. Whenever you want to take a decision of any investment, ask that okay, what is the long-term behavior of this asset class or of this fund. Let's say tomorrow you want to invest in DSP ABC fund. Someone says that invest in DSP ABC fund because its last year return is very good. 99% investors make investment decisions in similar fashion. The worst way to invest. The best way to invest is that okay, is this fund suitable for me? Show me the 20-year track record. Show me that when markets fall or NAVs fall, how badly can it fall? Can I digest that? So you cannot ever take away market corrections. They are a part of the game. They are a part of the rule. It's not a bug. It's a feature of investing. So be prepared. through good asset allocation. Invest when the headlines are bad, particularly for stocks or asset classes. Right now, all headlines are good. So be slow and measured. And lastly, give time to your money. Everyone talks of Warren Buffett, a successful investor. He has grown at 18%, but there are, enough funds in India which have delivered 14-15% also. But the secret source of his, $90 billion wealth is not 18% CAGR. It's 18% for 65 years. So in the equation, when you bring 65 years is when the wealth goes up. Most investors in India have an average holding period of 2 to 3 years. 2-3 साल से wealth नहीं बनता है. By playing T20 we don't make money. So prepare for a match. Be a marathon runner in this game, not a T20. T20 भी जरूरी है for fun, for entertainment, part of the game. There are times you can play like T20, but then keep a small part of the portfolio for that. Be more, broad-based in your approach and do well. That's my all the best. That's my only feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kalpen. Well, that's all we have, guys. For you, thank you for so much for tuning in. We look forward to having you join us back for our next session. Till then, stay home, stay safe, and stay calm.
Thank you. Good day. Bye, everyone.